Morning, everybody. Welcome to our meeting this 15th of April. I'm just going to run through the health and safety. I think everybody in the room is aware the exit the way you came in or out this door and into the car park, assemble in the car park. Do you have any apologies? Do you know if Gary's coming? Oh, he's gone. Okay. Right. Any conflicts of interest on the agenda?
I should just note that I've been appointed chair of the ARC for West Coast Regional, just for the record.
Thank you. That's not a conflict.
No, it's not a conflict, but updated my declarations.
Yeah, that's good. We have a recording device. We do. We're live streaming. Do you have any announced urgent business? No, if there's announced anything of me. Yeah. Excellent. So if we can just. So we're going to have a little bit of a change today. We've got a workshop starting at 11. So we'll pause the meeting and then pick it up again at the end of the workshop. We'll just go through these minutes. The confirmations that we'll see. I note that we've had a couple of suggestions popped in. Michelle's got those. Thank you, Karen. So page 8, 9, 10, 11.
Can I just say, it's just, but on page 13, it's not married instead of, I mean, it's not a normal practice to write my apologies, just, yes, we can just correct that, please. Yeah, but other than that, I'm happy.
Yeah, so with the minor corrections.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm Mary, seconded, all in favour? Thank you. Right, any matters arising that aren't covered elsewhere? Page 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
If I may, Madam Chair, it's just in regard to the, maybe just perhaps if H would like to give more in relation to the Balmoral camping ground, just from a risk management perspective. I think it would be useful for the committee to have a bit of an update on that process. Please.
Sure. So there's an assessment done by Electrees regarding the trees in the Balmoral camping ground. They suggested taking out a number of trees from the centre part of the camping ground in order to make it safe and stabilise it. So that in the meantime, that whole area is taken off and not being used. We expect that the cost of removing the trees will be paid for by the trees themselves. So we're not expecting there to be a cost or a large cost to doing this, but it will make the campground safe. And that work's not going to be done until after Easter.
Yeah.
Have you read everybody?
Yeah, I'm covered. I just thought from a risk perspective, it's good that we all understand.
Thank you. Thank you
I
for
may
raising.
ask a question on that. Over the Easter period, which is going to be a peak period, is there anyone going in to make sure that people aren't ignoring the take fines or anything like that?
Yes. Yep. There's someone on site from the committee that runs, or from the trust that runs that campground. I understand the number of the trustees will be there over Easter as well. So, yep.
Thank you.
Excellent. Continue on the thing. Yep. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, so page 14 is work, and I do note scanning through the 15th of April list of songs and review of the insurance policies I have not done for this meeting. There's a couple under major project review. The Soldiers Block, there was an intention of having a report on that. It's not here. The RP transitions there. The fly ride that's sort of just halted at the moment, but we've got orders, local order done well there. Just been discussing with the governance team around the adoption of the annual report, which is the 31st, and before the 31st of October. The issue we do have, and it's a change to the local electoral act around swearing in of the new council, doesn't provide us with an ideal opportunity to review and adopt the annual report. We're going to have to, I think, to meet the statutory deadline, call an extraordinary council meeting. But the thought was that perhaps we include a meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee in early October to review, do the Risk Committee's review of the annual report. So at least there's been a thorough review of the content of it before it hits any sort of a new council saying, here you go and adopt without sort of scrutiny place, because we certainly won't have, I mean, all the best will in the world, I won't have an annual report done on the 12th of August, or certainly not in time to get on the agenda. So we're just missing a month, and I'm looking at Graham primarily just to see what sort of timing would work in respect to that.
Yeah, we have a difficulty this year being an election year and with the legislation, because under, I think it's Schedule 7, Clause 32, I think it is, of the Local Government Act, the approving of the annual accounts is not a task that can be delegated. And consequently, we cease to have a council, I guess it's the day before election day, the 10th. And then we don't have a new one until it's sworn in, and someone's not thought very well. And so we've either got to get it all done this side, or we leave it to a new council. Problem with leaving it to a new council is that if there is a big change, they may not be very keen on signing off, which you can sort of understand. So we've really got to have the Audit and Risk Committee, if we're going down this route. We're probably not going to make the 31st of October, and B, which will be a breach of legislation, which has sort of been taken out of our hands a little. And I think if we are doing that, we should make the point of the accounts that although we might have been ready to do it, had we not had the election and this hiatus, to make the point, we should make sure that we have a very thorough review, well documented from the old councillors, to give assurance to the new councillors coming in. And I guess the continuity of the people that we do end up with continuity, because I guess all but me round the table and the staff, of course, there is a risk that you might not be there. Absolutely. Which brings out a whole new thinking of risks about induction and how do we bring people up as succession planning and all the rest. So, but we need to have a process, because it's not something that can be delegated, unfortunately, to our CE. I've been and investigated this one at another council, and everyone's in the same boat. Unfortunately.
Particularly because I think you can't swear in a new council until 7 days after the final result is published. Is that
Yeah, through Madam Chair, the legislation changed in 2023, so we have to wait for 3 days after the announcement of the results to see if there's a recount option. And then once those 3 days are done, then the CE must announce the first meeting, and that period needs to be 7 days. So it's 3 working days to begin with, and then 7 just any days, calendar days, but that does mean that we can't have our ceremony a lot earlier like we usually do. It just pushes it out.
It could be up to about 15 days, depending on, particularly if the announcement day is on Friday. You've got Sunday to Wednesday, and then 7 working days, it's the following Wednesday.
And Labour Day is on Monday.
And Labour Day.
So that really adds to it.
Yeah, so it's close to 15 days. So in my view, I think it's something that we should probably write to LGNZ, copy to the minister to say, look, guys, you've actually got a problem with your timings of the legislation. Either you shift the election or do something, because we will go into statutory default with no real fault of our own.
Sounds like we should be doing that, but equally, and good advice. So looking to have an extraordinary meeting before then?
So I think what we need to do is, as close to the election as we can, we get an update on the audit, get the auditors in so we understand, get to the stage of this as a stage of the list of where there is there is work to do, we explore what it is, and probably put our thoughts on paper into the minutes for the new ARC. Whether we end up having a second ARC before the council approves it in close succession, probably is a call to be made at the time, based on how many people and the commonality coming through. You'll get back in wherever the knowledge is retained, but otherwise there may need to be an education session.
So if we can work with you to find a date that works, I mean, your schedules, you and Mari are busy schedules.
It's very quiet for some reason between about the 7th or 8th of October and whenever, because most councils don't schedule any meetings until they come in to the next one, which is then when the bottleneck hits.
So will you, if you were talking about getting this, casting our eye over it prior to that, so can we find a date and we'll make that happen?
Yeah, no, that'd be.
I think it's just got a
fantastic.
straw date in there.
Yeah.
Observations possible.
Whatever the Tuesday is before election day.
7th.
7th of October, it's Tuesday.
Should just go and check.
You'll have it all signed up by then, though, Jess.
Yeah.
Yeah, current totally free.
Track record.
9 AM.
9 AM on the 7th? We'll pop that in the calendar.
I'll put a holder in there.
Thank you very much.
If our governance person could do her usual wonder.
Right, anything else?
There is a report on the audit plan and PE as well,
Yeah.
which sort of elaborates on.
Anything else on there that you want to cover? No, you don't have to say.
Yeah, and so page 26, related to health and safety, so you like it on.
Good morning.
Looking at the last 2 months, we had 7 incidents that were worth. There was 2 medical incidents. One involved a contractor and a partial degloving. That was a work safe notifiable incident. And we've had someone had a twisted knee, which was an old injury, which is probably been exacerbated by uneven ground. The 3 instances of intimidating behaviour. One, the swimming pool, which when we've looked at, we've done better, and we've got training in place to try and alleviate that in the future. And 2 at different campgrounds where there's been an altercation between the camper and someone working on the campgrounds. And 2 instances of first aid treatment, one of them a minor incident with a craft knife at the library with a foot being recovered, and one of them was a slip sprain. So on improvements, we've now got corrective actions listed on our intranet. So the idea behind that is that we can disseminate information easily across the business, and part of it is so that people that are reporting incidents, and it's this positive cycle, if you report something actually happens, they can see that there's been a process in place and something's happened. The other part of it is to encourage lateral thinking, so someone might see an improvement or a corrective action and think, well, actually, you do work that's similar, perhaps there's something we could look at here and improve our process. So it's that idea of sharing information across. better knowledge, we get better outcomes. There's a lot of good work being done in the background to improve parts of our information sharing and flowing after incidents are reported. So we put a lot of emphasis on getting stuff in, and we want to try and streamline what we do with that information. And part of it is acknowledging that the information has come in, and part of it is showing that something has been done, so that gives people the incentive to carry on reporting. And to realise there's no such thing as, you know, no such thing as something that shouldn't have been reported. All information is useful.
Fantastic. Anissa?
Through the chair, John, can you tell me which campgrounds were affected?
One was the one down at Amberley Beach, and that was where a camper had decided to take a chainsaw to one of the trees, and I can't remember which the other one was. I think it was up near Hammer, but it was where a camper was incorrectly parked and was asked to move on. And again, this is part of the training. That could have been a chance to disengage, but an altercation arose where the camper put a whip out of his and said, "Don't come near here because you might get injured."
Thank you.
Through the chair, just be clear, on page 29, we've got reporting by year. Is that our council financial year or a calendar year?
What's the total?
29.
Are you recording January to December or by the council financial year?
It would be January to December.
Maybe if you have the ability to put at the top in the heading by calendar year, just because we're quite often dealing with a financial year.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good clarification.
So on that basis, 41 and 25 versus 117 for a full calendar year, we're sort of on track to 200. 160, I should say.
So I don't have the full report. I just have a copy of the dashboard that I've put in. So if you could name
That's the page facing you. It's the one I'm looking at. No, other
Yes.
other side.
page.
That one. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
We've got 41 for this calendar year
Yes.
and 117 previously. We're on track, if you multiply that by 4, to be somewhere around the 140, 150 mark.
Yes.
Any comment on why the uptick?
Just I hope it's because as we get new people joining the council and I go through an induction, I put emphasis on how important it is to report, and it's probably a bottom-up type thing. We've had some this morning by a middle manager saying, got these reports, what do I need to do? It's almost like a new process for them, because the people in the organisation, they've had the training, said, well, we need to report this, and what do we do with it? So I think it's a gradual, slow change of the culture to try to show that we should get things reported, and when things do get reported, we acknowledge them. So.
Would it be useful, because we want to see increased reporting, and then it's deciphering from that what's a serious incident and thorough, and if that's something that would be helpful, or if it's something that's possible within this report, I guess.
So probably the ones that are more worthy of looking at are the ones that are listed in the background information. So if it's a medical treatment, whether it's a first aid treatment, and if there is, so I've got the 3 instances of symptom behaviour, that's more of a trend, and a sort of injury would be noted down. If there was serious damage, noted as well. So they normally fall in that background section.
So the importance is to look at these side by side, really, isn't it? That's the reporting, and this is the breakdown on this side. Does that?
Yeah, if I may, a supplementary question or two. Do we have a documented and tested plan should we have a major incident as to what to do, all the steps? You know, I'm talking about a serious work-safe incident, which is possibly tailored to rest of council and the pools. point, because probably, pools are definitely a risk area and a chance where we might have a serious incident, be it medical or otherwise.
So I can't comment on the pools, but from this perspective, we've got nothing that's tested. We don't have a tested process for that. We don't have a specific plan. We have a notifiable event process, which is documented in the health and safety management plan. And we also have a process flow for an incident, and that has an escalation procedure in it as well.
I'm just thinking what to do immediately if indeed we have a really serious incident. What the steps are, notifications, who is going to be recording the scene, so and all that sort of immediate stuff, assuming it's safe. At what point do we engage with legal advice? Then move right through mirroring the health and safety person that's coming in, making sure we induct them properly and don't forget about it as they come in to do their investigation right through.
No, that's not documented.
Could be worthwhile, Murphy's Law being if we're well documented, we won't need it. I'm a bit of a believer being of Irish descent in Murphy. But is worthwhile. I can probably find some slides that a legal firm put together of some ideas. It's pretty sketchy, but it'll give a concept.
There's, yes, and I take on board what you're saying. There's WorkSafe themselves have quite a good process, reliable process that we follow. If it was a major event, then I would probably be involved, and senior officers would be involved, and it's almost like, do we document? I don't think you'd be looking at the paperwork at that point.
That's why I raised the point, because it requires instant decisions and people knowing it, and therefore why you test it, to make sure it's embedded in those people that are going to be involved, as right from, is the site safe, first aid administration, that's calling ambulance and that sort of thing, but very early afterwards is being able to capture the scene in such a way that you know that it's not going to end up on social media. And how you attack that, and then all the immediate steps that are going on.
Yes.
So it's almost leading up to the WorkSafe investigation, then when you've got one, making sure that you're totally and utterly mirroring it and doing your parallel investigation, and having every meeting with WorkSafe has with anyone, with someone present that has got the appropriate skill set, because it will derail the organisation for months. So it's very important to get it right as a process, and then to test it.
If I may, I think, and that's why I asked for an update of the Balmoral camping, actually, because the immediacy of our action at that time to protect further and to fence off, if you like, the potentially hazardous trees, I guess, that I think that's a testament of what happened in the immediate following that. It was a terrible accident, but it could have been significantly worse.
I wasn't aware of that background.
Yeah, so, I think that we've got some procedures in place, and I think part of our role is also, from my perspective, is helping our community understand why we need to do what we need to do, because we talk around this table because we now know the risk. You can't not know the risk from here on in.
Can't unsee it.
You can't, that's right, and so we understand where the risk profile sits and the actions that we need to take as a council to remove that potential risk in that council-owned facility. So, I think there is some comfort in that process, because that potentially could have given rise to some of the issues, I think, Graham, that you're talking about. Yeah, so, yeah,
If I can, through the chair, council's got one employee who carries the statutory responsibility. I think it'd be important to get CE's input on the discussion and thoughts.
Yeah, so I mean, we do have an escalation process, as John mentioned, these things normally get to me pretty quickly. Just because of as you say, where that statutory risk sits. And if I think I need to take a role in it, then I will, but generally speaking, the team handle these things pretty effectively. There's obviously the comms risk around some of these things, particularly when members of the public are involved, and the comms team are normally on the job as well. So the management involved the comms team in the discussions. John's very good at making sure we do the statutory part of it as far as notifying WorkSafe, etc. So you know, I guess as chief executive, part of my role is to be comfortable with where we are in health and safety, and if I'm not, to actually do something about it. And at the moment, I'm relatively comfortable. We've started a lot more work on investigations now that John's leading, so that we're trying to squeeze the maximum amount of incidents where there's something that's worthwhile looking at a bit deeper. So we're getting that work done. John's busy embedding that in the system. So, you know, I think not only do our systems work, but I think we're making progress on some of the stuff as well.
Yes, Chair, I would just, I'm a great believer in less is more. If you've got a lot of paperwork, the first thing is that you need to be across it and you need to understand it and you need to remember it. The second part is if you've got something that's a process and it's a tested process, then that itself could be an indictment, because you then have to prove that you have followed your own recommendations post-incident. If something has happened, you have to say, well, WorkSafe will say, well, here's your process for a serious incident. When did you last test this process? They'll find that the area that you've missed out on and say, well, why is that? And it will be, it's an easy way to say, well, you said you're going to do something, so why is it slipped here? Because it's resulted in this. This is our evidence. This is our injury. That's all the evidence we need. You've got a gap here. Explain.
That's the way I said and tested and educated, just so that the initial reactions are the right ones, probably for the first hour.
Right.
But then you might have a generalised look. If WorkSafe gets involved, we must always shadow, etc. Which is, you don't want to have it too detailed, but you've got to have the escalation right, and part of it is preserving the scene as much as you can, and documenting the scene for any subsequent investigation by ourselves or WorkSafe.
And I guess following from that, then if John's the person, if you're not there, you will have it will be recorded somewhere that the steps people need to take. If you're not there, I think that's one of the key things, isn't it? That it's easily accessible by anybody.
Yeah.
So, and those are the basic steps that you're talking about, isn't it?
So it may take.
And it is.
That's in the health and safety management process.
And I think it's reasonable to ask those questions. So I mean, that's
To gain assurance.
To gain assurance,
Which is the role
absolutely.
of this committee.
Exactly. Karen?
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. John, I was just looking at page 28, and I was looking at the top right number for the department, and the far right waste team has almost had, if you like, the number from last year already. And of course, property is already exceeding the number from last year. And I just wanted to ask if there was anything kind of underneath that beyond what you're saying, which is that people have become a lot, awareness is raised and there's a lot more activity of people being proactively, you know, reporting and stuff. But I just thought, you know, we're a quarter of the way or whatever through the year, it's quite a high tracking. That was what I noticed. And wonder if you had a comment.
So with the waste, we've got some very engaged contractors, and they've picked up on our keenness for information, and there are a lot of incidents that happen, for example, down at our local centre with with traffic management and traffic flow, or with people dumping the wrong type of waste and creating hazards. So it's almost raising public awareness of what you can and can't do and how we control it. And these incidents are recorded and they're reported through. There's a very good relationship between our waste department and between the contractors that work there. So that's why we've got much better reporting now compared to numbers of employees. It's very, very high reporting.
A supplementary question. So that proactive reporting by contractors to resolve, for instance, traffic management issues and so on, that then falls to the officers to come up with a plan, perhaps in conjunction with the contractors. I'm just wondering if it's led to any changes. Or
So you'll have, with the last incident, we had someone go down and do a walk through site, and with them they took one of the health and safety representatives. We've had investigation training from a completely different department, so you've got a fresh set of eyes looking at the same information. And in some cases it's almost like the ground topography is wrong, so if we could step back 10 years and redesign this site, we would do this, but unfortunately there's a slope here and we can't do anything about that slope. So what do we do to mitigate? We talk about people that are have put the car into reverse instead of drive, or have left the handbrake off and the car is pulling back with a trailer on it. So these things, you can't eliminate human error. You can just mitigate it by the situation that you put humans and environment into. Sometimes there is no answer, but it's this awareness that helps us to try and mitigate these things, and because of that. So, for example, when a car's gone into the wrong lane and we've just sort of halted the site because it's been a Saturday, it's been busy, there's a lot of traffic. I mean, we don't want things to escalate. Yeah, you can see what's happening, you can drive around, but not everyone's going to do that. So just stop people coming in and just clear it away. And it's just that calm assessment of what's going on that keeps it.
Okay. Thanks for that, John.
Thanks.
So, Madam Chair, I note that some of our most difficult to control health and safety risks are where we're interacting with the public, where they bring their own risks with them. And the other area that's very difficult for us is volunteers. And the two really key areas.
But I also think that we're making great strides in this area, getting the more reporting, but actually following through and letting people see what's happening. And I think that's a huge advance. And investigating rather than just recording it. So I think we're on the right path, and I think these are great questions because what we're looking for is assurance. And we've had the ability to give that to us. Anything else from anybody? Karen?
I just wanted to note on a positive note, the bottom graph on page 31. What that is that we know rescues and what we do now for this time. January and February. Is it, am I reading that correctly?
Yeah.
That's correct. That's a result of the new slides and the new landing area for those slides. So good engineering, good design, with a specific focus on the safety aspect here. So it's worked as planned.
Great result. Thanks.
Any other questions? Anything else you'd like to add, John? In that case, thank you very much. It's been a really good discussion. Somebody like to move the information? Steve, Mary, thank you, Karen, all that. Have a good day. Right. Back to you. Oh, yes, back to page 15. Right. going to do that, sorry.
Right, yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, page 15, 16, 17 is just the standard report on the action points from the report to council over the journey. Not a lot has changed over the last couple of months. We've been focused on local would have done well and also the annual plan stuff. There is a number of these issues that relate to fixed assets, which we're working through as part of our transition to a new ERP system as well. So, yeah, and you'll see in public exposures, there's another report to council from the auditors that has a number of other recommendations which will be added to this, and then got a chance to try and accumulate some of those into some key projects to move forward. But yeah, certainly happy to answer any questions if there is any. 16 and 17.
Move, that the information be accepted. I'm happy to move it. Someone happy to second. Karen, all in favour? Aye, thank you. Right, 18.
Yeah.
OAG observations.
So this was just the Auditor General had released a full report on the observations from the 58 long-term plans that were adopted last year, and just so some of those key observations listed on page 18. Yeah, we're in a significant change, obviously, with the future of water services. A observation of increasing operational costs and increased capital costs, which no surprise to us as council, and that, yeah, obviously leads to, particularly the capital expenditure has led to higher debt levels, but also higher rate increases, and some councils, yeah, getting to a point where they're about to exceed or getting very close to their self-imposed debt limits, and that is, OAG said, does create risk for council's long-term financial sustainability and, in particular, ability to respond to unforeseen events, which we've experienced also. One thing that the OAG have recommended that the VIA and the local government sector review the content of the long-term plans to ensure they do remain fit for purpose. I think, and yes, yeah, there's a group from a reference group that I'm involved with that have been appointed to start looking at that. And yeah, just to try and create a bit more usability to the long-term planning process, and certainly improve with from where I sit, improve with the development of the consultation document, because in the past it used to be the full draft long-term plan went out, all 600 pages of it, that really engendered a lot of feedback from the community. But yeah, there just seems to be sort of a gradual lack of engagement, which is concerning, because the whole point is to engage with the community on these matters. But yeah,
I mean, if I may, you don't, Graham has it at every meeting he goes to as well, but right across all councils, there's these sort of discussions are taking place on probably what I'm hearing, so I don't know whether there needs to be a fundamental shift on how things are done, but actually it needs to, the overwhelming desire to be transparent to the community is our utmost goal, but actually I think that feels like the intense documentation doesn't endear it to the community to read and understand. So there's a tension there, and it seems to be across up and down the country.
And certainly from my point of view, there's such a high level of prescription required in the documents that we send out that it does take away from the key points that you're trying to convey. Yeah, I think it is certainly see what the DIA comes out with and the local government sector.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because when everything's going well, oftentimes people aren't that interested. But when something goes wrong, that's when they really want to get down into the detail to see where it went wrong. And again, it's about finding that balance, isn't it? If it's recorded somewhere, if somebody really wanted to go, but all the extra, and who's the audience? If the audience is our ratepayers, then they need an easy to understand transparency. So is it just transparency to our ratepayers, or is it transparency to government?
We often need to be recorded, often question who we're doing the long-term plan for, the auditors or our ratepayers.
Yeah, that's right.
Which
That's the question.
and again, the auditors are in a difficult position because they've got such a high level of prescription required, and that they what they need to do.
Which is where I was getting to, Madam Chair, of one of the things should be what audit involvement is actually required and what is the value add for quite a large piece of expenditure. And can there be guidelines that are put in place? Because to me, we're creating this for our ratepayers, and it needs to be focused on the key points where there really is the ability to make a decision, whether or not we treat the water, move the sewage, a lot of that stuff, we have no choice on, we've got to get done. And there's not really decision points that are going to affect the ratings that the ratepayers ought to be consulted on. But it's more strategic stuff, and are we going to continue providing this service? Should we get into doing pensioner housing? Should we get out of pensioner housing, low cost housing, whatever? Big strategic decisions. And the choices of getting them to focus on that and really being very clear to say this portion of the budget, the options are you either have treated water or you don't. Unfortunately, legislation doesn't give us the choice. So that's given. And a lot of the stuff, work out where the decision points where we can take community input and where we have no choice. Because community probably think that the council's can that magically wave a wand to reduce rates or increase rates to a large extent. And really the amount of areas of, I guess, decision are really quite limited, as you will all know from being on the councils for a while. There's certain things you just got to do.
And I think the other thing from a community perspective is nobody steps away from the fact that we need to have an independent audit. We need to prove to our community that we are working in a diligent manner to meet the expectations of our community and funds that we receive to provide those services. But I think it seems from what I hear, it seems that it's the range of detail that actually doesn't engage people, doesn't engage our community to actually understand that, and if we could get to a place where, even if you ask people on the street, what does local council provide, very often they can't actually describe it because, we don't always provide that information. It'd be much better if we could actually showcase what we do and do well, and actually have that audited accountability on aside that, so. But I guess it's a bigger beast than what we are just right here, right now, because it's affecting councils up and down the country.
And it's very costly.
And we should be, the cost to actually produce the LTP is currently prescribed. Not saying that we shouldn't be doing it at all, but we've got to have a long, hard look at how much of it's adding value and how much of it's legislative compliance tick box stuff that actually adds no value. That's and that's with the audit again, getting it focused into have we got the right questions, having a look to see whether there are any major stuff ups in the model is probably still there. I have unfortunately seen them over my years.
So there's work.
So it's an
Councillor
issue,
might add
yeah.
that, you
There's
know,
an issue, but there's work going on in the background too.
Yeah. And I suppose, the changing face of, potential changing face of local government, with water being delivered differently, for a lot of the communities. It is time for a bit of a reset.
So that's sort of issues and future focus. We're starting to work on that. That would be where that would sit. Yep. And keep an eye open for an opportunity to engage with that.
for instance, at another council, which I'm not involved in, to leave it to being about 60 odd, there was a serious consideration as to whether they were better to do away with libraries and provide each rate-paying household with an iPad, so that and have got council-wide subscriptions to various things as an alternative to running live libraries, and that's the sort of area where community consultation should actually be engaged, because it's not an absolute must-do legislatively bound service. It is a nice to have type area, and there's possibility of different ways of delivering.
So it would be an interesting question to have in our district, wouldn't it? Remove the aspect of the library and provide, that would be a very brave soldier,
Yeah, well, that
but that's
I've heard that from another risk person, that was being thought about as they examine how to keep rating prices down, because they reckon that would be a considerably cheaper method of delivery. But then they had council service centres sitting in their libraries and the various other things, so it wasn't quite as straightforward.
Sometimes it's interesting to have those conversations though, because then people either they see the value, if that's the type of thing that someone was looking at. I'm not suggesting for a moment that that might be something we would do, but sometimes when you're looking for new ways to do things, you have those tough conversations and then you find that there's support there. So it's sometimes there isn't. Yeah, so it's just interesting. Karen.
Yes, I can't think of a better person than Jason to be involved in the review to see if LTPs do remain fit for purpose in the future. And I think it's great we're going to do that, and good on the OAG for recommending it. And on that basis, I'm happy to move the information we received.
Thank you, Karen. Seconded.
And yes, if a final thing, can we put this on the do list to come up sort of about 12 months before the next LTP is due?
We've got a firm timetable on the LTP already, so
so having it in here to make sure we come back and revisit this paper.
Thank you. On that basis, if we record that, then you'll have to second it.
Yes.
All in favour? Right, thank you very much. Good discussion. Right, draft annual plan.
Right, the draft annual plan itself, it only started in earnest in March, so we didn't have this paper at the last meeting of this committee, and because the decisions of the council through the budgeting is already been involved in public. That's why it's in public at the minute, but just running through quickly, and it's probably for the major benefit of Graham, what we've undertaken so far as workshops with both council and the various community committees, and then culminating in the council adoption of the draft budgets on the 1st of April. The key takeaway obviously is that for the 25-26 year, we've got a rates increase of 3.31, growth adjusted rates increase. For the long-term plan, we were looking at 14.5%. So there's obviously some major things going on in the background, and the major thing is on page 21 around the roading projections in it, and it was just scaling back from what we had in the long-term plan as far as operating and capital costs for roading had been it had been scaled down for the final long-term plan adopted in July, but then we've come back again and had another crack at it and done what we need to do with essentially the available funds. So NZTA is certainly, or Wakakatai is certainly won't be providing anything more than about the 5.5 million in subsidies for the forthcoming year. One of the, sorry, I'm getting out of order here. When the long-term plan was adopted, we were still expecting that there would be funding for the low cost, low risk program. That hasn't eventuated at all. We did have a budget of about 1.2 million for low cost, low risk projects, which we were funding our 48% share of. Now, there is no matched funding from NZTA. So we have a savings of about 616,000 being the council's share of that low cost, low risk program. And we're actively using that to offset the cost for the 25-26 year. So instead of a program of 17.7 million for roading, it's now 13.5 million, of which NZTA's contribution will be 5.4. We've got the benefit of those unspent monies from the low cost, low risk program from last year, meaning that the net rating requirement is about 7.5 million, which is pretty much what we had rated for in this current year. In the long-term plan, we were predicting that the rating rates would go up to 11.2 million, and that in itself was about a 49% increase in the rating rates, but overall that 14.5% increase. So with that level being largely consistent with the 24-25 year, the overall increase is significantly reduced. Down to 3.31 million. And just the rest of it, rest of the paper is just outlining some of the key changes that we've made. The capital expenditure budget, we did do a forecast of the capex for the rest of this financial year. Some of that did flow into the next financial year, but we also did a review of the 25-26 capital expenditure program, and it moves from 37.5 million down to 31 million. And a big chunk of that is a reduced roading capital expenditure. And there are some projects there that realistically, the SBR, the sequencing biological reactor for the Habitat for Amberley sewer, had a budget of about 2.5 million. The reality is that will straddle year 2 and year 3 of the financial year, so out of the long-term plan. So only a portion of that will be spent in the 25-26 year. The thermal pools, just a bit of a piece about that. We are predicting that the surplus will be, well, in the long-term plan, we have forecast that the surplus from the pools will be about 500,000 less than what we had budgeted for. At the end of February, we were down 477, so the 500,000 is relatively conservative. But we still have in the budget the provincial growth funding for the fly ride, but clearly naturally it's doing the work. So we don't complete the work, we won't get the funding. And there's a significant amount of work still to be done there if it goes ahead. And so this was when we looked at the budgets way back in March, and the forecast could well be different as we move into the finalising of the annual plan, and also the budgets for the 25-26 year. We've used what was allowed for in the long-term plan in year 2, so that could be a little higher, given our higher than it could be, given that we are predicting sort of a $500,000 lower surplus for this current year. The absolute key thing for council is the dividend we pull out of the thermal pools of 1.6 million for the 25-26 year. That's a component that affects rates. Anything else from the pools does affect debt or affect the repayment of debt or the withdrawal or the increase in debt due to capital projects. So I know the thermal pools are revising their budgets, and as we move into the final process for the annual plan, we'll be able to amend those budgets accordingly. Right down the bottom of page 22 there, based on the budgets that I've got for the thermal pools for the 25-26 year, we're looking at having an opening balance of debt of about 18.5 million. The net surplus of 1.5 million as listed above, that's after depreciation and after interest costs. And then adding back the depreciation, which is non-cash but used to repay debt, and then taking off the forecast capital expenditure and the dividend, we're looking at a debt at the end of 26 of 18.9 million. So it was about $500,000 more starting the year. Okay, the key component that does affect a chunk of the budget is the interest rates, and with the drop in the interest rates, we've made the assumption that would go from the 4.25% that we had allowed for in the long-term plan down to 4%. And that flows through top of page 23 through to the internal interest rates that are charged on any activities that hold debt, and certainly the thermal pools debt. Insurance, we hadn't budgeted the significant increase, particularly in the professional indemnity insurance, so we have forecast what that insurance will be for the 24-25 year, and then added a component to it for the 25-26 year. So at least that elevated level of the premiums is allowed for in the budget moving forward. Audit fees, we're expecting the cost of the annual report audit for the 25-26 year to be $250,000. So that's been allowed for. It's about $50,000 more than what we allowed for in the budget in the long-term plan. Then some components around the local would have done well, but primarily for the 25-26 year, it's just additional costs relating to levies from the drinking water standards regulator, and we haven't allowed anything for the economic regulator at this stage because we're not quite in that space. And yeah, the potential if local would have done well, if the transition to a joint council water services CCO occurs, it will be after the 1st July 26, so it doesn't affect the annual plan. And then a piece on consultation, because and normally when we've gone out with an annual plan, there hasn't been significant variations from the long-term plan for that year. The only one I can think of was in the 2020-21 year, in the midst COVID that we had substantial reduction in the rates by moving things around. But because there is significant movements, we're required to go through a consultation process, formal consultation process. But we've been at pains to state that the change to the roading expenditure budgets isn't a change in levels of service. It's just a refinement of the cost structure. Had that discussion with our auditors yesterday, and they appear to be comfortable with that assertion. And that just means we don't go down the track of a long-term plan amendment, which will just delay things by months, because it will require another. So we were certainly keen to avoid that.
And to be fair, I think when we were out consulting previously, we said year 2 would be subject to getting that funding from Kotahi. So we did signal that in advance to people, but it is a significant change. And so I can understand why it's in here.
And you certainly made it quite relatively explicit in the consultation for the long-term plan that the opportunity to refine those numbers will be in the subsequent annual planning process, which we've subsequently done.
And the assumptions we're talking about here are a moment in time. So from our point of view, were they reasonable at the time? Take it as, I guess, is the
Yeah, I suppose why it's come to this committee, because this committee does, long-term plan was to just, I suppose, ensure robustness around the assumptions we've used. And this paper's just trying to outline those key assumptions that we have made.
Great.
I sort of start from 3.31 versus CPI versus considering from a risk perspective, have we actually got enough? That was my original question. I now understand the roading, we've actually not needed any more. So I guess in the consult, we're going to need to set out the fact that these are all the programs that Waka Kotahi are no longer funding. So therefore we deem them to be unaffordable for us to fund 100%. And therefore to make it very clear. Now the options are that they could come back and say, actually, those were really important, forget the fact that we're not getting funding, we need to get on and do it. Or alternatively, we're okay, because that's probably the major area of change. The other one, of course, is that CPI excludes movements in interest rates. So the fact that our interest rates have dropped will actually mean that if that saving goes straight through to a saving in if you're benchmarking against CPI movements. CPI is sort of sitting around about 3-ish% if we listen to Treasury. So to me, this is making sense at a high level, as far as we shouldn't have too many risks arising from only doing 3.31% leading to a level of service drop other than roading. So to me, it's making it very clear that we are making this decision because of that.
We're not going to have a service drop.
No service drop in roading. We're just not going to increase the service in roading.
Well, that's what we promised, difference between what we'd originally promised and what's there is because the government's not doing its bit. So,
But we have to be very clear that we're not dropping the service in roading. We're maintaining the service of roading at the existing level.
But we are perhaps not going to provide all the upgrades that we might have once seen.
The increased level of service we won't be able to provide.
Yeah.
We're maintaining a level of service, but we had hoped to increase the level of service, I think, was the.
Yeah, so because we're just basically status quo with last year. So it doesn't flow through to a rating increase. So it all basically makes sense, but to me that seems to be the major point you've got to make really clear and don't make the mistake I just made as chief executive.
You're not the first one to say
No,
that, so
no,
I'm very wary.
I was getting ready to say that, but that can be cut so quick, I thought. So, what we do on that one, we've got to.
Yeah, so the process from here is, we're developing a consultation document, or I'm trying to develop one, and I've just added some keynotes here. They'll be adopted by council at the end of the month, go out for consultation for all of May, and then submissions in June, and finalise the plan at the end of June and strike the rates accordingly.
So are there any other risks, Madam Chair, that we ought, or decision points which creates risk if we don't get it right, other than roading, that needs to go into the LTP consultation, where there are decision points the community can give us feedback on?
Well, we've got some CapEx included in there, that some of that would have been carried, pushed forward as well. Is that not correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and there was another component actually in Karen's area, in the Haranui community to provide some funding towards the Waikari Hall that's in dire need of some major upgrade money's been done.
That's
and
500,000.
yeah, and that hadn't been allowed for a long-term plan. We aren't foreseeing that it will have a rating effect immediately in the 24-26 year, but flowing on from there it will have. So yeah, we're certainly keen to get some feedback on that, and just need to vet out the discussion on that in the consultation document.
Highlighting the fly ride, probably, and the decisions there associated. If we don't get the funding, it doesn't go ahead. That be.
Well, I think the question is, does it go ahead and we'll get the funding?
Yeah.
It's more of but it probably needs more funds than what we've got available in the grants available. So it will push up the debt if it is concentrated in the thermal pools. Has been allowed for, but so and the
It's not going to
same.
change.
Yeah.
From the previous one. If we're looking at this one and we're looking for what's different, but also what's reasonable. So I guess the question there is what we've allowed for, or how we've described the fly ride. Does that seem like a reasonable statement to report? And does it now rise to the level that perhaps we should be saying something about this consultation? I think that
Given the community feeling, it's probably, if we fail to put that in there, we might be inviting someone to have a go at us. Why didn't you consult on that? Because there is certainly some split there from what I can understand. It's a chronicle of society in bits and pieces, and whether we ought to just take it out on the chin and get the feedback from everyone as to given where it's at, and you've put a big asterisk there, subject to completion of the fly ride project, saying, well, these are the variables. Intend to go ahead with it, but let's get your feelings on it, but only if we get the funding and the approvals and it all ties together. So,
Yep.
So to be fair, there's still some discussion as far as an information to come back before a decision's finally been made on whether it
goes ahead.
goes ahead or not. So
Right.
that's why it's still in a bit of a, we haven't completed all those
Well, it's
steps
probably
yet.
then an assumption that we need to make clear that it's sitting inherent in the annual plan.
Yes,
Where we're not capable of making a decision yet as a council.
yeah,
And I mean, I'd be quite comfortable about that being in that sort of frame, I suppose, without actually, I don't think we're at a point of actually understanding the detail yet of whether gonna no-go. But I guess what you're saying, Graham, is that it could be signalled in a consultation document that we're just in that place.
Yeah.
And, you know, without real certainty, and I think that would be okay to signal that.
Through Chair, I think that the level of consultation is largely hinging on how it's going to be funded as well. Because I think originally with the consultation, it was just based in Hammer Springs, and at that point, the funding was government, through our government funding. I think if we're looking at get funding through council now, that will automatically require a wider district consultation. More expected. But there are still questions as to how it's going to be funded. I think we're still having conversations with, we're looking at investor profiles, so I don't think it's going to directly fall back on us.
And I think just to add to Vanessa, I think that's why it would be okay to have something that's saying, hey, look, we're still in this process, we've worked through, the environment report said this, but there's still uncertainty, and I think it's just signalling the uncertainty as opposed to signaling the intent, and I think.
I think that's the best way to handle it.
Absolutely, because I think,
And because the uncertainty, we've made these assumptions,
Yes.
but they could change.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right, and I think we need to be very clear that there is, you know, we are actually in that hiatus sort of unknown.
I think that makes it clearer,
Yeah,
much
and
clearer for everybody.
I think that's
Very comfortable with that.
Thank you. No, great feedback. And to my very, very skeletal consultation document.
Any other, sorry, looking, we're reviewing the reasonableness, is there anything? Graham, I think. Anything else from you? So,
It makes sense.
makes sense, and we don't need to do anything, we just reviewed it, we don't need to.
I'm happy to move that with, inclusive of the discussion we've had around the consultation document.
Thank you, Mary, thank you, Vanessa. In favour? Excellent, right,
And 33. Michelle's made this.
Michelle's paying these. Interest register, yes.
I probably will just take the report as read and just note that all the returns were received on time except for one. And it was from,
Just looking to check.
from a community board member. And we followed up. When I followed up with them, it was a bit of a misunderstanding. They just assumed because nothing had changed, they didn't have to register anything. So once that was done, it was given to me pretty promptly. So after talking to the CE, we sort of thought we didn't need to progress it on any further. The other thing to note is that we probably need, before the next election, is just have we look at the process and see whether we're still complying and whether we're still doing the right thing, because it was a fairly new law that came in just before the last election. And our staff policy is just attached at the back there, so that's how we handle it all. That includes referrals of any breaches. So that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions?
Just a couple of, I mean, I was thinking about the new community board process with Southboard coming on. I mean, I'm guessing that will just get naturally embedded into that process where newly elected will need to declare in a more formal setting. So I guess we'll just make sure that we don't miss that trick, I guess, is what I was sort of thinking about. I know you'll have that in hand. But it's just a question. I mean, the event for Hiranui, just from my own perspective, you know, has now, since I've filled this in, has now dissolved as a, and so I've still got it on there because it's kind of a year behind, you know, so it's a bit odd. So, you know, should I get it changed now? This has happened after the time frame, you know, because it's just odd. I'll be sitting there with a whole year where actually that board is no longer functioning.
I think through the chair, that is probably the biggest issue I do have with the interest is reminding people that it is for the previous year. So
Yeah.
declaring anything from the previous year, even if it was only 1 month of that year that you owned that property, and then you sold it, it still has to be declared. So anything new that's happening now outside of it goes into next year's interest register. So I guess where that comes a little bit of a gap is if somebody is doesn't get in to next year. And then we will have this gap of not knowing what happened during that time of this period this year. Which is actually an interesting thought, which just occurred to me just then.
Yeah, just seemed weird odd that actually
Yeah.
we've declared for something that actually is a year past. Yeah, as opposed to,
Yeah.
but I suppose it's hard to actually get that sort of line in the sand anyway.
Yeah.
Things can change quite quickly.
I guess through the chair, if there was to be a decision being made on a particular topic, you would still put that you're no longer
Yeah,
part of that, and that would come up and just a conflict of interests.
yeah,
But this particular thing is the register.
yeah.
So it's it's a little bit different.
Interesting. Okay.
Karen,
Just a point, I noticed that LGNZ through Alcona are putting out, or have put out, publicity or information for prospective candidates who may be contemplating standing for LGNZ. I didn't actually look in there, but it'd be really good to signal to people that whatever they've done in the 12 months leading up to them standing would need to be subject to this if they were to be elected. Because I feel like you wouldn't normally expect that, when you come in, if you've, for instance, I just sold my business before around the time I was elected, but actually for 12 months, that was still part of my record, if you like. A lot of people might think because the timeframes are known around the election cycle, oh, well, I'll sort of divest or whatever, but if you've still got those interests within the previous 12 months, it will become public. So it just occurred to me it might be worth checking that LGNZ have made that known, and that our system also for new candidates or prospective candidates just covers that interest register in the period that it relates to for each return.
Graham,
Do we have a process to validate the returns coming from our community board and councillors and everyone that's caught? What I'm thinking is that another council I was involved with, we found when we ran a product called InfoLog, which is Murray Towers, their product, they've got a specific one for validating that. We actually found a community board member who had not, inadvertently, as it turned out, very similar to your situation, Karen, declared something. We had forgotten to declare something, so doing a bit of validation. It basically is a product that takes the details of the people and matches that against publicly available records. The cost of it's not that great, like less than $1,000 from my understanding. Whether it's worth thinking about that. At the same time, you might want to get a very similar parallel report done between council members and creditors' databases and that sort of thing, to look for potential conflicts and extend it to perhaps staff members who are in a senior position able to influence decisions, to give some assurance that our conflicts of interest declarations are actually in line, because the two logically should be done together. It's basically the same testing. It's electronically done, so it's, last time I asked for one, it was about $600 plus GST. That was for a larger council than this one.
Yeah, I do. Around annual plan time, do a search of all the relevant registers to try and just make sure everybody is, because essentially the auditors do that as well. So I just try and get ahead of the game. But yeah, sounds like it could do that a lot quicker than I can.
For everyone's education, Murray's one of the members of Certified Fraud Examiners. He was based in Auckland, just relocated to Christchurch. It's a business that he's got, and you can use it for getting motor vehicle information, credit checking, there's all sorts of parameters. But he's custom written one report to go search all public registers and spouses and all sorts of things like that to go and look for potential conflicts of interest. And that's predominantly used for purchasing, but it can also be used for elected members' declarations.
I noticed that on this, the onus is actually on the elected member too to get it right, isn't it? And if they don't put it in. So there isn't, under the legislation, I don't think there's an onus on the council to check it, although it makes sense. But if you haven't declared something even inadvertently, that responsibility definitely sits with the elected person. But it's just and it's been interesting because all the time on council, the first time, I think we filled it out once. And that was it, and we updated it if something new came up, but then being told, well, you're responsible to make sure you get it right, so go, so yeah, it takes a wee bit of working through to get that, and it can be a bit intimidating, looking back at your, the understanding it's really there for conflicts of interest, isn't it?
Yeah, and interest in transactions.
Yes, that might cause you to make decisions that favour. So it's not that scary, really. It just sounds that way.
I'll just tease it out, if we got an independent to do that work, if Jason, you're doing it anyway as part of our, natural process.
Probably not as thorough as could be done.
Yeah, so if we engaged an independent person to do that, financial analysis, I guess, on us as elected members, is that something that is done with the knowledge of the elected member, or is that just something that will be done as a course of action of being because you are an elected member? So, where does the
way I'd see it, if we identify that they're a director of a company or that they have declared, it's probably advise the boss to tap them on the shoulders to say,
okay,
get your act together. What we mentioned, we identify the entity, and then we do checks in our own debtors and creditors systems to make sure there isn't any significant transactions between them that are not at arm's length.
My understanding is it goes to the next level of looking at addresses and registered offices and all sorts of things to see if there's people that might be living in the same residence or those types of things under different names, and goes a little deeper into things, is my understanding of the product.
I guess I'm thinking just through the chair, if it's a task that we're already doing, and I know the pressure is always on Jason and the team, it's another job that if the costing is, like what Graham's suggesting, under $1,000 maybe, it may well be a good investment in time from the financial team performing the same task or getting the same information.
And I guess the question I would ask is, what is the assurance we're looking for from that? Because the interest register is the responsibility of the person standing. So what assurance purpose would we be putting on that from our point of view?
That's why I raised that it's useful at the same time to do a validation of staff conflicts of interest registers and potential identifying potential conflicts that might be there that may be not there. It's basically the same process. You're matching people's names and details and addresses against company's office records, your supplier records, and just bringing it all together electronically to look for potential issues.
And gives us assurance that
that side of it is actually good as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's relatively cheap, but Jason's got Murray's details, so he can probably get an estimate to see whether prices might have changed in 3 or 4 years since the last time I saw that exercise being completed.
It's actually one of the recommendations that the auditors have picked up with last
There we
week's
go.
audit as well. So, yeah, might be a way of,
Knocking a few
closing
words
the loop.
off.
Yeah, because we're doing it internally and it's time and cost and, you know, if it's something that can be outsourced because we're doing the job anyway.
Mia raised a good point, and that is about notifications to people that have been involved as to the extent of it. And that's probably for Jason to liaise and then go out and say that we plan to do this. But if you've got any objections, please come back to us. Now, if we got objections, one would assume that we might then sort of say, well, what is your objection? Just in case.
Yeah, I think you might.
And say that we'll need to conduct alternative verification procedures.
So how does that happen for, to Karen's point about, you know, someone potential new candidate, you know, do we, I mean, it's too late after the induction if there's an objection and they've made their way on to council, you know, like, is there a fine line there somewhere?
I don't think we can do it on people who may become councillors.
It would only be done after the election, so they can feel.
And a good time as we've just done
Yeah,
the register.
But what if they got, sorry, just exploring that, what if they got on to council and then they objected to having that scrutiny?
Yes, potentially we'd have to do it another way, or we consider whether it's a code of conduct breach.
Yeah, okay, that's cool, that's good.
Because if we've got a stated policy that we need to
Yeah.
validate this for contracts for the procurement
Yeah.
side, so not prepared to submit to that, then there's a problem, there's potentially a problem.
Okay, that's correct, thank you.
And I think the court of public opinion would say, why wouldn't they
Yeah,
do that? Because I want to know as a ratepayer
of
that
course, yeah,
are independent of the decision-making process.
you know, that's helpful.
I think one of your key points there is if it's a stated policy. So if we were to go down that line, we would need to have it as a policy that we do, because then people would be able to look it up if they are interested in standing for council. There's a certain, yes, you put information out there, but there's also a certain amount of responsibility to look into it.
And it's probably inherently in our purchasing thing initially.
Yeah.
And it's all integrally involved in that. Don't know whether CE's got any thoughts on that topic.
Oh, I just wonder how far you go to validate the stuff. It's, you know, it's a voluntary disclosure. Although, well, it's not voluntary anymore, though. The conflicts of interest is voluntary disclosure, but there was a mandated disclosure. But is it the job of officers to check whether governors have disclosed correctly or not?
But it is a role of government, of generally of the council, probably a combination of governance and management, to establish that perhaps procurement policies are being applied correctly and declaration of interest into those are valid. So that's why I'll probably join the two together, because that's essentially, on my understanding, the same piece, the same query. Will attack both. So you get almost a freebie on the declarations, but you're focusing it for procurement purposes.
And that's why I was talking before about being focused on why we were looking for it. So if it's on that sort of a basis, then that it probably sits a little better. So narrow focus rather than just a broad brush.
The other council I'm aware of that did that actually was doing it primarily for that, but they saw that there was overlap. Because if the council's got a declaration of interest, they've probably got a conflict. And it's typically in the procurement side.
It's risky, isn't it?
As it turned out, it was a minority shareholding in an entity that supplied it, and they were not directors.
Yeah.
But they're still caught to have to declare it under the shareholding head.
So
That was signed.
I guess the other interesting thing in that regard though is if you own shares through Sharesies, for example, where it's through a nominee, then you're not necessarily going to be able to see that.
True.
No, but you're likely also to have an immaterial interest.
Yeah, but
So I've just had that one, I've been asked for one of these at another council, and I was sitting there and saying, hang on a second, I do have some shares in Chorus, for instance, and they're supplying telephone services. How far do you go?
Yeah, I know,
Mm,
I know.
mm.
And
And if you're an active trader as well, where you day trading, I mean, it gets quite ridiculous.
yeah, so I think there's got to be, are you in the position where you can influence a decision to benefit, where you'll get another benefit? And for most councils, their entire spend would be totally immaterial to a public business company. In most cases, Fulton Hogan is a private company, that might be a different one if you're using them for contracting. But if it's a listed entity you're holding, for most of us, mere mortals, are probably going to be many decimal points of a percentage, of a single percentage. You know, the number of shares that we're likely to hold in an entity.
Absolutely, and that's why I think we've
So-
got to be quite targeted on
Yeah.
what we're looking at, because we could spend a whole heap of money and a whole lot of time to. So if we're going to be looking in that line, we need to be
Yeah.
quite clear about materiality and ability and that type of thing.
And
But it's
the fact that the computer's going away and looking at it and giving you data, the risk is the amount of time you spend analysing the data. It's
Yeah.
probably not the time spent in getting the data.
Mm. Okay. So it's under the interest register, if it was the information being received. But I think that is the purpose, is to have some of these discussions and get some understanding, and maybe there's, I don't know if there's anything. We might look into some of that and see if it's
Yeah, I know.
where,
certainly.
what level it might be applicable and with the focus. Excellent, then I move that the information be received. Thank you, seconded. Graham, and all in favour? Excellent, now, next, what have we got?
Page 39 is
Yep.
expenditure
That's
delegation.
right, I was there a moment ago. Expenditure delegations, I'm going to speak to this.
Yeah, so appendix 1, page 41 and 42, just the recommended changes to the delegations, expenditure delegations for individuals, and it's largely due to refinement of position descriptions more than numbers per se. There is in the planning board strategy and community team, they now have, when this was last done in November 2021, there wasn't a team leader of planning or a team leader of strategy, so it's making provision for those team leaders to have some expenditure delegation, and the strategy one's obviously a lot higher because they're dealing with bigger pieces of work. And yeah, as I said, most of the rest of the ones in blue, with the blue changes are just changes to job descriptions. And then the Hannah Springs thermal pools delegations, just as a complete belt and braces approach, is just refining some of the descriptions of personnel, and just changing a couple of the delegated levels. Now, I just note that the manager of sales and marketing previously had a delegation of $30,000. That's still the case, except for one supplier they have in Harvey Cameron that does a large amount of marketing stuff on behalf of the pools. You know, it's regularly more than 30,000, so it's just allowing that. And similarly with the engineering and maintenance manager, same thing, but their electricity bills are invariably more than 30,000 each month, so it's just an allowance up to 50,000 for each of those. But it's hard to sort of write that into a policy. It's just easier to give them the full delegated authority up to 50,000. But in reality, if they request the general manager to approve a payment of between 30 and 50,000, we're actually not, they're not doing anything inside the policy. Hopefully that's explainable. I've got another two carried away.
Great.
Makes sense. We're about to transition accounting and ERP systems, is my understanding. When doing that, are we going to be able to capture sufficient data to electronically query whether these have been followed so that we can check it without having to do poring over individual transactions and develop a query?
The way the system goes at the moment, anything, if I enter into a purchase order of more than 200,000, it won't let me approve that. It has to go up. So it's built into the system to prevent that.
And invoice splitting, where you might have something over, we'll just use you as an example there, no intent, need, mean, but let's say you had something at 250 and you divided it into 2 invoices to the same supplier in a short period of time for 125 each. The ability to capture that data and start looking for electronic, by electronic means to report out. So bear that in mind as you're designing.
And
implementing
right,
that.
I can do that. I could approve.
So it says for ABC limit, and hang on, we've got two invoices in a relatively short period of time, maybe 60 days or something like that. For less than that, to actually flag that up and say, is there good reason? Because that's the way to get through a delegations limits. And also looking for the lower level ones of numbers that are sitting just below a delegation limit, which in one organisation I investigated, we found an $800,000 fraud, and that's what they were doing, was that was putting through invoices just below a delegations limit. And also, are we specific in this as the application of GST? Because I can't see that actually mentioned as to whether it's inclusive and exclusive. So those were my sort of 2 pennies worth.
Yeah, I think the intention is, and it's not explicit, and I'll make it explicit, that these numbers are GST exclusive. But I'll just check. Yeah, I think so, but I'll check whether the system.
And just check
Currently,
those.
and
Just thoughts as you change ERP systems. Is the data captured to allow to do this sort of querying of your database? Because that then moves into internal audit abilities.
And clarity is key.
Yeah.
But I suppose the process is, if you're happy with those allegations, the recommendation is to recommend this to council for final approval in the meeting at the end of April.
And
Jason, I just heard you say this, but the operations team, the roading engineer, which is no longer a role, my understanding, was at 20's been taken out, but the operations manager for roading has got, which would have absorbed that role, has got $50,000 expenditure limit. Am I reading that correct?
Yeah, well, the previous roading manager always had 50,000 anyway. It's just a refinement of the description of the, so between Kushner and Charlie.
Right, okay, that makes a little bit more sense to me, thank you.
sorry, Karen?
Thanks very much. All this makes sense to me. I can see that there's been a bit of restructuring and changing of roles and so on, so I have no problem with that. I just wanted to ask around the Hammer Springs Civil Pools and Spa about the had a new tourism budget that some of those folk oversee. I'm just wanting to check an assumption I was making that the same delegations as well would apply to them, so it's 2 secretaries and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so Shane does have a level, and there has been a number of purchase orders for Huronui tourism that have gone up the chain to need to approve, just because it was over the $30,000 mark.
Thanks.
Yes.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I just wanted to address Graham's point about potentially multiple invoices under limits. I'm pretty sure that within Datascape we'll be able to do some sort of reporting on that there's been multiple invoices capture that. But as another level, albeit not formalised, all those payments do go through our accounts officer, who I have to say is pretty sharp about picking up things like that. I know it's not a formalised sort of thing, but I'd be pretty confident that if there were a number of invoices that were coming through slightly under limits over a period of time, that we would have visibility of that.
Thank you.
And certainly it's developing a bit of an internal audit process to identify that.
Bless Madam Chair, these are games I've seen.
So, Madam Chair, just do note that we do split the roading invoice because the maximum approval limit is $1 million. And so we get Murray to sign off the total amount, and then we split the invoice so that it goes through as two, because $1 million is the max amount that anybody can sign off on.
Just one for practicality to actually get it over the system.
So that will show up if you test the system.
In the RISE scheme, I might just highlight a couple of things, but I wouldn't want to do it in public just because it's mechanisms where people have played games. Yeah, might be a wee bit more targeted. I wouldn't like to give people ideas. In a public environment.
We'll have a section later on.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. Karen.
I was going to offer to move that the updated expenditure delegations as set out in Appendix 1 be given to Council for adoption.
Thank you, and seconded by Graham. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, does that include the GST? Yes, with the. Thank you, mate. Excellent, rightio. Now, we've got a workshop at 11, haven't we?
Yeah.
Do you think we'll get through this next
I-
bit
I-
and
I
try and
think
get
so,
have morning tea?
Yeah, the
Radio?
only item is the treasury.
Radio?
And I don't have a lot more to add to it than what
Okay.
Mark provided in his commentary
Excellent.
on and this was prepared as of the 4th of April, but last week the markets experienced a level of volatility due to some factors. Yeah, so obviously with tariffs being put on and then delayed and deferred, and it did have an effect on the particularly the 90-day banknote rate that I was monitoring went up and down sharply towards the end of the month, end of the week. But I suppose the official cash rate was dropped to 3.5%. And the outlook is that it will go down to, will drop at least another 25 basis points, maybe another 50 basis points in the next two reviews. So that's the one that I focus on because it has the biggest effect on our external interest rates. Just know on page 4 of my dashboard there, just and I'll report this to council as well. Just a policy breach where the under their interest rate and interest rate risk cover there, we need to have 25% of our hedging within the 2 to 4 years. We've got 24.68%, so it's just a very minor breach, which we're working to resolve by over the next couple of months. Page 5, just pertinent for today. I've got these three tranches of debt there that mature on the 15th of April today. So we've got 3 million, 2 million, another 2 million. That 3 million right at the top there is that is at the interest rate of 0.88%, so that's gone.
You expect them, they burst into tears.
So 7 million is maturing today, which we're replacing with 9 million of new debt, spread over 3 maturity dates, 28, 29, 30. And we've got our short term right at the top, $10 million of short term debt that matures next week, and we'll be rolling that over for another 3 months. So yeah, by today, because by now already 77 million now becomes 79 million of debt, and our annual plan forecast was going to be at 86 by the end of the year. Still some transactions to take place depending on cash requirements.
Right.
Yes, noting compliance, I think that's important. 3 and 4, pages 3 and 4, the compliance statements we specifically note. Where you're expecting interest rates to be in a declining environment, it's need to be towards the bottom of your bandings. So I almost see that we're right on it as being a good thing, given the expectations are that we're in a declining interest rate pattern. If we're in an increasing, we would probably want to have more hedging in place if that was our perception. So to keep it simple as to which side of the bands we should be in the economic cycle. Yes, there's a lot of uncertainty out there with what's happening with a certain ginger-haired gentleman. I'll be kind.
Don't blame all ginger-haired people.
A certain one. He is not resident in New Zealand and seems to change his mind as often as he presumably changes his underwear. There is a lot of uncertainty out there. So, no, it's really, we've just got to ride it through and think long term with this. But the interest rate drops are not going to be as fast as everyone thought 6 months ago or 3 months ago, even. Okay, it seems to be. Yeah.
And then of course there's the flow on effects. We don't know what's going to become potentially more expensive than what
which
we
is
budgeted
a
for
which
as
is
well.
a risk overall for the council as to what is the risk of increased costs.
Componentry.
And until this settles down a little, I don't think it's reasonable to jump to conclusions. I think we've just got to sit here and look and just have another review down the track as an emerging risk. Because it may be that if stuff's more expensive to go into the US, that we might find that suppliers are prepared without that portion of their market to give it cheaper into countries without tariffs. So we may benefit reduced import costs potentially. So it may not all be bad, it may be an opportunity rather than a risk.
Yes.
But who knows?
Great. Any other? Does somebody want to receive? That's just to be received.
Happy to move that way.
Yeah, every second.
Thank you, thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
And that's our open agenda done. So should we move into PE now and then we won't have to do it later? So having read the reasons, items to be discussed from PE, if we agree with those, somebody happy to move us?
I'm
Thank
happy
you,
to move in
Graham.
that
Thank you,
direction.
Karen. All in favour?
Aye.
in PE, we might